They wake up knowing that if today goes wrong, no one will help them, and winter will finish what hunger already started. Whatever fails now will not be forgiven, explained, or repaired. There are no horns, no warnings. Only frost on the floor and animals shifting because they are already being counted. This was normal. This was the life most Vikings never escaped. Not the man carved into stone. Not the one who left on a ship. The one who stayed. The one whose survival depended on soil that barely fed him, weather that never warned him, and neighbors who noticed everything. Most people imagine Vikings as raiders. Restless, violent, free. That image is dangerous because it hides where the real pressure lived. Most Vikings were farmers. Raiding was optional, farming was permanent, and it never forgave mistakes. The land was thin, rock pressed close enough that every field had to be earned. Every year, summers were short. One cold week at the wrong moment erased a season, and there was no second chance. There were no reserves, no stored mercy. You planted knowing the sky could refuse you, and if it did, no explanation followed. Every decision mattered. When to sow, when to harvest, when to kill an animal you might need alive later. Mistakes didn't announce themselves, they waited. Then they starved you quietly. And this is where it became permanent. Farming wasn't just labor. It was identity. Land decided whether you were someone. If you owned land, you had a voice. You spoke at assemblies, you carried weapons, you could demand compensation, lose the land, and you didn't just lose food, you lost protection. Inheritance fractured farms again and again, each generation smaller, weaker, until the soil could no longer feed everyone. Then someone had to disappear, or submit. Tenant farmers worked land that was never theirs. They paid rent in food and labor. One bad season from dependency. Below them were thralls. They worked the same fields, but nothing they did built a future. It only prolonged someone else's. And this was worse than punishment, because what followed was quiet. Farming meant isolation. Farms were spread apart. Help was distant, but judgment was constant. Thin fields were noticed. Weak fences remembered. Sick animals spoken about softly, and whispers mattered. A farmer who failed too often lost something colder than status. He lost obligation. Trade slowed. Visits stopped. Patience disappeared. Sometimes the law did nothing at all. It stepped aside. No one was required to help you. If your barn burned, it wasn't their concern. If your child went hungry, that was your failure. That knowledge kept people compliant, silent, working past exhaustion, because stopping marked you. And this is where safety ended. Failure was never private. A field that yielded less was visible. A fence left unrepaired was a statement. An animal sold too early raised questions. No one accused you. They adjusted. Shorter conversations, fewer visits, less weight when you spoke. Winter didn't just measure crops. It measured people. And this is where the myth collapses again. Viking society wasn't chaotic. It was rigid. Custom ruled everything. When to plant, when to harvest, when to speak, when to stay silent. A farmer didn't just grow food, he performed order. Ritual mattered because uncertainty was everywhere. Sacrifices weren't superstition. They were negotiation, with forces that never explained themselves. The farmer fed warriors, ships, leaders. When raids succeeded, wealth returned. When they failed, the farmer absorbed the loss. Fields don't pause for glory, and this imbalance was remembered. A bad harvest after a failed raid wasn't blamed on luck. It was blamed on decisions, on leadership, on trust given too easily. Resentment didn't explode. It settled and waited for winter. Raiding became tempting because farming was suffocating. Young men left not only for wealth, but for air. To stay was to accept a life measured in winters survived. Not victories won, but leaving carried its own sentence. If a farmer died on a raid, his family collapsed. If he returned injured, the land slipped away. Fields do not wait. So most stayed. They endured. Winter made sure of that. Cold sealed the ground. Darkness stretched the days. Food thinned. Animals were killed early because feeding them cost more than their lives were worth. Smoke filled longhouses. Illness moved quietly. In winter, status blurred, but memory sharpened. Everyone counted, everyone watched, everyone remembered, because memory was leverage. Land disputes didn't fade, they fermented. A boundary stone shifted, a grazing right denied. A marriage refused. Years passed. Then the moment arrived. A farmer didn't need a weapon. He only needed to refuse help once, at the right time, or remember a debt when the other man was weak. Violence was rare. Pressure was constant. Winter rewarded those who waited, those who noticed who borrowed twice, who needed help again, who hesitated when they should have endured. By spring, the decisions were already made. Who would be trusted, who would be tolerated, and who would be allowed to fail alone. Children learned this early. They worked as soon as they could stand, not because parents were cruel, because time was. Mistakes stayed remembered, even years later. The gods reflected this reality. They demanded offerings, but promised nothing. A good harvest proved nothing. A bad one explained nothing. That uncertainty kept people obedient and afraid. For generations, the Viking farmer lived knowing he was essential and disposable at the same time. Society depended on him, but would not save him. That contradiction shaped everything. The silence mistaken for strength. The endurance mistaken for pride. The stories skipped the suffering because it was expected. This is what is rarely said out loud. The Viking Age was not built by warriors. It was subsidized by farmers who never left home, by people whose names were never recorded, because surviving wasn't remarkable. It was required. Ships sailed because fields held. Raids succeeded because someone stayed behind. To be a Viking farmer was to live under pressure that never lifted, watched by neighbors, by gods, by seasons, knowing no one was coming to save you. Not because they didn't care, but because this was how the world worked. And once you understand that, the myth doesn't soften. It tightens. The Viking was not defined by the sword. He was defined by the field, and by the quiet certainty that next year, it might finally not be enough.